What's up, guys? This is Chris from DraftDashboard.com.
Here are my DFS picks for NFL Week 5. Final look.
These picks apply for DraftKings and FanDuel. Before I get started, please drop a like on this video and hit that red subscribe button
And hit that bell icon.
so you don't miss our new videos.
In this video, I'm going to go over my top picks for this week's NFL slate. And if you stick around to the very end of this video, we'll use the Draft Dashboard tools to make a DFS lineup using the picks we just made. Okay guys, NFL Week 5. Let's take a look at the quarterback position. So, studs on the slate, you got Josh Allen and Jalen Hurts. I like both of those guys, but they're expensive. So if you want to save some salary at the quarterback position, I got a couple of people I'm looking at. Take a look at Jared Goff from the Detroit Lions playing the New England Patriots, who have a middle-of-the-pack defense overall, and they give up the 8th most fantasy points to opposing quarterbacks. Jared Goff has averaged 23.7 fantasy points per game on the season, getting an average of 1.8 rush attempts per game. Now he's only going to be about 2% owned, so I think this is a sleeper pick right here. He's projected at 17.5 fantasy points here in week 5, only 6,100 DraftKings salary. He's 1,900 more on FanDuel. Vegas thinks there's going to be 45.5 points scored in this game, with the Lions trailing by 3. Now, Jared Goff, his wide receivers are a little bit banged up, but they were even more banged up last week, and he still put up 37 fantasy points, put up 15 and 26 fantasy points the games before that. So he's been doing pretty well here, averaging 23.7 fantasy points per game on the season. Hard to argue with that. His ownership is way too low. Salary is super low. And he's got a good matchup. So I like Jared Goff here versus the New England Patriots. The other quarterback that I like if you want to save some salary is Tom Brady from the Tampa Bay Bucks playing the Atlanta Falcons, who have the 6th worst defense overall. They give up the 9th most fantasy points to opposing quarterbacks. Tom Brady has averaged 16.5 fantasy points per game on the season. He gets an average of 1.5 rush attempts per game. He's going to be about 11% owned, projected at 20.7 fantasy points here in week 5. He's 6,000 DraftKings salary, 1,800 more on FanDuel. Vegas thinks there's going to be 46.5 points scored in this game, with the Bucks favored by 10. Now, Tom Brady had been struggling throughout the season, but he really didn't have his weapons. He had injuries all over the place, but now he's got all his weapons back. Chris Godwin, Mike Evans, all of his guys are back and healthy now, so he's got his full arsenal. And I think he is ready for a Tom Brady-like game. Get the distractions of the season out of the way. He put up 29 fantasy points last week. So I love the matchup here. If I'm going to go with a cash game quarterback, it's probably going to be a guy like Tom Brady. But if I'm looking for a tournament pick, I like Jared Goff with that low ownership. So I like Tom Brady here versus the Atlanta Falcons. Okay, let's take a look at the running back position. So, studs on the slate, I like Derrick Henry, Nick Chubb, and Austin Eckler. And out of those 3 guys, my favorite pick is Nick Chubb from the Cleveland Browns playing the LA Chargers, who have the 7th worst defense overall. They give up the 3rd most fantasy points to opposing running backs. Nick Chubb has averaged 23.7 fantasy points per game on the season, and he's getting an average of 20.3 rush attempts per game and 2 pass targets per game. So a ton of volume, only going to be about 6% owned, projected at 17.6 fantasy points here in week 5. He's 8,000 DraftKings salary, 1,400 more on FanDuel. Vegas thinks there's going to be 47 points scored in this game, with the Browns trailing by 2. So Nick Chubb has scored 24, 20, and 32 fantasy points in the last 3 games, up a 19, 23, and 17 rush attempts, on top of 3, 1, and 3 pass targets. So I love the matchup here, and I think he's going to go under-owned out of the studs. I think he's in the best spot. So I like Nick Chubb here versus the LA Chargers. Okay guys, it's time to announce the winner of our $25 weekly PayPal giveaway. And the winner is Kendrick Davis. Kendrick Davis, congratulations. You are the winner of this week's $25 PayPal giveaway. Please reply to our comment to collect your prize.
Before I continue with the picks, I'm excited today because we added a new contest for everyone watching.
If you want to enter the drawing for $25 PayPal,
all you need to do is like this video, hit that subscribe button, and make a quick comment below to be entered into the drawing. We'll reply to a random comment and let you know that you won.
And we'll send you $25 PayPal.
So it's that easy, and we pick a new winner every Saturday and announce them in our video. So get your comment in now so I can add another entry for you.
Okay, so if you're looking to save some salary at the running back position, you could go with a guy like Miles Sanders from the Philadelphia Eagles playing the Arizona Cardinals, who have a middle-of-the-pack defense overall. They give up the 8th most fantasy points to opposing running backs. Miles Sanders has averaged 17 fantasy points per game on the season, getting an average of 18 rush attempts per game and 2.3 pass targets per game. He's going to be about 7% owned, projected at 14.4 fantasy points here in week 5. He's 6,500 DraftKings salary, 1,100 more on FanDuel. Vegas thinks there's going to be 48.5 points scored in this game, with the Eagles favored by 5.5. Now, Miles Sanders really hasn't done all that well this season, but he exploded for 33 fantasy points off of 27 rush attempts and 3 pass targets last week. Now, he's got a great matchup here versus the Cardinals, so I like Miles Sanders here versus the Arizona Cardinals. Okay, now this next pick, probably not going to be a popular pick. He had a bad week last week, but outside last week, he's done pretty well. So I like James Robinson from the Jacksonville Jaguars playing the Houston Texans, who have the 9th worst defense overall. They give up the absolute most fantasy points to opposing running backs. James Robinson has averaged 15.6 fantasy points per game on the season, getting an average of 14.8 rush attempts per game and 1.8 pass target per game. So he's going to be about 6% owned, projected at 14.5 fantasy points here in week 5. He's 6,300 DraftKings salary, 1,700 more on FanDuel. Vegas thinks there's going to be 43.5 points scored in this game. They have the Jacksonville Jaguars favored by 7. Now, James Robinson only scored 3 fantasy points last week off of 8 rush attempts, but I would throw that out because he scored 24 and 16 fantasy points the weeks before that off of 17 and 23 rush attempts on top of 3 and 2 pass targets. Now he has a fantastic matchup, so I like James Robinson here versus the Houston Texans. So I think this is a tough position this week, guys. Outside of the studs, I think it's kind of hard to find a good running back that you can trust this week. So you're going to have to go to guys like Antonio Gibson, Damian Harris. You could go with a guy like Najee Harris, but he also had a bad week last week. So this is a tough week for running backs, but I like those guys that I just gave you there. I think James Robinson is actually in the best spot. Even though he had an awful week last week, he would be my number one running back pick if you want to save some salary. Him and Miles Sanders. Okay, so let's take a look at the wide receiver position. So studs on the slate: Stephon Diggs, Tyreek Hill. But the number one wide receiver, because Keenan Allen is out, the guy that I'm going to go to this week is Mike Williams from the LA Chargers, playing the Cleveland Browns, who have a middle-of-the-pack defense overall. They're middle-of-the-pack defending opposing wide receivers. Mike Williams has averaged 15.5 fantasy points per game on the season, getting an average of 7.8 pass targets per game. He's on the field for 91% of the snaps, projected at 15.4 fantasy points here in week 5. He's 7,100 DraftKings salary, 300 more on FanDuel. Vegas thinks there's going to be 47 points scored in this game, with the Chargers favored by 2. So Mike Williams has scored 22, 9, and 28 fantasy points in the last 3 games, off of 11, 6, and 10 pass targets. So I like Mike Williams here versus the Cleveland Browns. Now I also like Mike Evans. I like Terry McLaurin. Take a look at Terry McLaurin here from the Washington Commanders, playing the Tennessee Titans, who have the 4th worst defense overall. They give up the 3rd most fantasy points to opposing wide receivers. Terry McLaurin has averaged 12.2 fantasy points per game on the season, getting an average of 6.8 pass targets per game. Now, he's been on the field for 90% of the snaps, only going to be about 2% owned, projected at 13 fantasy points here in week 5. He's 6,200 DraftKings salary, 300 more on FanDuel. Vegas thinks there's going to be 43 points scored in this game, with the Commanders trailing by 2. So Terry McLaurin has scored 4, 19, and 12 fantasy points in the last 3 games, off of 6, 9, and 8 pass targets. So I like Terry McLaurin here versus the Tennessee Titans. Okay, now you could look to a guy like Chris Godwin. He scored 13 fantasy points last week off of 10 pass targets, only 5,900 DraftKings salary. He's 1,100 more on FanDuel. He's got a fantastic matchup here versus the Falcons, who have the 6th worst defense overall, give up the 7th most fantasy points to opposing wide receivers. He's only 5,900 DraftKings salary, 1,100 more on FanDuel, so I love that price tag. Gonna be about 17% owned, so I like Chris Godwin here versus the Atlanta Falcons. Now, another guy that I think has continued to go under the radar every single week, looks like his ownership finally starting to come up here, is Tyler Lockett from the Seattle Seahawks, playing the New Orleans Saints, who have a middle-of-the-pack defense overall. They're middle-of-the-pack defending opposing wide receivers. Tyler Lockett has averaged 14.8 fantasy points per game on the season, getting an average of 8.5 pass targets per game. He's been on the field for 82% of the snaps, going to be about 13% owned, projected at 13.7 fantasy points here in week 5. He's 5,600 DraftKings salary, 1,200 more on FanDuel. Vegas thinks there's going to be 45 points scored in this game, with the Seattle Seahawks trailing by 5. So Tyler Lockett has scored 14, 17, and 23 fantasy points in the last 3 games off of 8, 11, and 11 pass targets. So monster volume, low price tag. So I like Tyler Lockett here versus the New Orleans Saints.
Real quick, guys, I got great news. For a limited time, we're offering a full 30-day trial to Draft Dashboard. You can try all the tools for NFL. NBA is right around the corner. This is a great time to get in and try everything for 1 month. The tools are all about saving research time. You can see the last 3 games, the fantasy points per game, the targets they got per game, so you can see how involved they are in the offense, the rushes they got per game. Seeing all this stuff on one screen helps you save time and make better picks. Oh, and if you're tired of doing research every day, we just added a cheat sheet that shows hand-picked plays for the slate. No confusing stat lines, no headaches, just a simple cheat sheet that shows the absolute best players for your lineups.
Okay, moving on to the tight end position. Probably one of my favorite plays on the slate, and I don't understand why the ownership is still so low. I like TJ Hawkinson from the Detroit Lions playing the New England Patriots, who have a middle-of-the-pack defense overall. They give up the 3rd most fantasy points to opposing tight ends. TJ Hawkinson has averaged 16.8 fantasy points per game on the season, getting an average of 7.5 pass targets per game. He's been on the field for 85% of the snaps, gonna be about 5% owned, projected at 12.6 fantasy points here in week 5. He's 4,900 DraftKings salary, 2,100 more on FanDuel. Vegas thinks there's gonna be 45.5 points scored in this game, with the Lions trailing by 3. Now, TJ Hawkinson got some extra pass targets last week because the wide receivers were banged up, and they still are banged up. A couple of them are questionable. One of them is out. So I think he's going to continue to get a lot of pass targets here this week. He scored 43, 11, and 6 fantasy points in the last 3 weeks off of 12, 4, and 7 pass targets. So I like TJ Hawkinson here versus the New England Patriots. Now I also like Dallas Goedert from the Philadelphia Eagles playing the Arizona Cardinals, who have a middle-of-the-pack defense overall, and they give up the 2nd most fantasy points to opposing tight ends. Dallas Goedert has averaged 11.5 fantasy points per game on the season, getting an average of 5 pass targets per game. He's been on the field for 83% of the snaps, gonna be about 10% owned, projected at 11.5 fantasy points here in week 5. He's 4,700 DraftKings salary, 1,400 more on FanDuel. Vegas thinks there's going to be 48.5 points scored in this game, with the Eagles favored by 5.5. Dallas Goedert has scored 12, 12, and 13 fantasy points in the last 3 games off of 6, 4, and 6 pass targets. So I like Dallas Goedert here versus the Arizona Cardinals. Now I also like Tyler Higbee from the LA Rams playing the Dallas Cowboys, who have they have a good defense overall. They've been good versus opposing tight ends. Tyler Higbee has averaged 12.6 fantasy points per game on the season, getting an average of 9.5 pass targets per game. He's been on the field for 95% of the snaps, gonna be about 15% owned, projected at 11.6 fantasy points here in week 5. He's 4,300 DraftKings salary, 1,200 more on FanDuel. Vegas thinks there's going to be 42 points scored in this game, with the Rams favored by 5.5. So Tyler Higbee has scored 17, 10, and 14 fantasy points in the last 3 games off of 14, 4, and 9 pass targets. So I like Tyler Higbee here versus the Dallas Cowboys. Now, I also like David Njoku, Tyler Conklin, and Logan Thomas. Out of those three guys, I'd probably go with Tyler Conklin from the New York Jets, playing the Miami Dolphins, who have the 5th worst defense overall. They give up the 7th most fantasy points to opposing tight ends. Tyler Conklin has averaged 11.6 fantasy points per game on the season, getting an average of 7.3 pass targets per game. He's on the field for 88% of the snaps, gonna be about 5% owned, projected at 8.6 fantasy points here in week 5. He's $3,700 DraftKings salary, $1,600 more on FanDuel. Vegas thinks there's going to be 45 points scored in this game, with the Jets trailing by 3. Tyler Conklin has scored 8, 16, and 10 fantasy points in the last 3 games, off of 5, 8, and 9 pass targets. So I like Tyler Conklin here versus the Miami Dolphins.
If you want to try all these daily fantasy tools for yourself, click the link in the description below this video or just go to draftdashboard.com. You can use our DFS lineup optimizer to build quality lineups using our picks and your own custom player pool. Click the link in the description below this video and try all these daily fantasy tools right now. Thanks so much for watching. Oh, and don't forget to subscribe to this channel and hit that bell icon so you can get instant updates whenever we post a new video. Thank you so much for watching, everyone. If you enjoyed this video, please smiggity smash that like button and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Oh, and please comment below with your favorite player for this NFL slate. I love to hear what you guys have to think. Thanks again and good luck.